If you want to include your spouse and your children in your income tax return, then they will need social security numbers. But what if you're a visa holder but your spouse and your children are not eligible to get their SSN? Well, you probably won't like the answer, but you will pay more taxes because the IRS will consider you as a single person. I'm going to give you a simplified example, but please note I am not a financial advisor, I am not a tax professional, and this is only presented for informational and educational purposes. So if your annual salary is 65,000 US dollars and you're filing for income tax as a single person for tax year 2023, you will only be entitled to the standard deduction of 13,850 US dollars. Now compare this with the scenario where you're filing taxes married, filing jointly. So you will be entitled to a standard deduction of, this is way bigger, $27,700. That's double that of a single person. The bottom line is, if you include your spouse and your child or children in your income tax return, you will save a lot of money. And if your spouse or your children are not eligible to have their social security number, they can apply for an individual tax identification number, or ITIN. Before we dive into the ITIN application process, it's crucial to understand the concept of tax residency. So as a non-US citizen, you may still be considered as a resident alien for tax purposes. Not the one with the green skin and black eyes, just resident alien for tax purposes, if you meet the substantial presence test or the first year choice election. So let's talk about those. So first off, this section will only apply to you if you have a valid visa, such as you are an R1 visa and your spouse and dependents are on an R2 visa, or sometimes the H4B or H4 visa, which are like the dependent of the H1B. This may also apply. So, to meet the substantial presence test, you must be physically present in the United States for at least, take note of this can get complicated. So, for at least 31 days during the current year and 183 days during the 3-year period that includes the current year, the 2 preceding years, and calculated using this formula. Take note, as I said, this is complicated. So total days is equal to the number of days in the current year plus 1/3 of the number of days of the first preceding year, which is last year, plus 1/6 of the number of days in the second preceding year. So that's 3 years ago. So let's give a concrete example so it's easier to understand, because my brain is breaking right now. So for example, in this calendar year, you've been in the US for about 3 months or 91 days. Last year, you were here for the full year, so 365 days. And 2 years ago, you were in the US for only 2 months because that's when you first arrived in the US. So that's 61 days. Now let's run the formula. So the number of days in the current year, 91, plus 1/3 of the number of days in the first preceding year, which is last year. So that would be 365 multiplied by 1/3. That's equal to 121.67. And then we add 1/6 multiplied by the number of days in the second preceding year. So that's 61 multiplied by 1/6, which is 10.16 days. So add 91 plus 121.67 plus 10.16 days. So that's a total of 222.83 days, which is greater than the minimum needed. So in this case, you meet the substantial presence test. What if you do not meet this requirement because you just arrived last year? Or maybe you just arrived this year. So you have another option, and that is to do the first year choice election. Under the Internal Revenue Code, certain non-US citizens who do not meet the substantial presence test can make a first-year choice election to be treated as U.S. residents for tax purposes in their first year of arrival. So this election allows you or your spouse to file a joint tax return, claim your dependents, and take advantage of various tax benefits available to resident aliens. So in a nutshell, even if you are an alien or a non-resident alien, just for the purpose of taxes, you will be considered similar to citizens and to resident aliens. That did not help? Don't worry, let's move along, and hopefully this will clear things out as we move on. So this is what we did for my son the year after we arrived in the US. So he was not qualified under the substantial presence test, but we wrote a letter, a statement, and asked the IRS to consider him as resident for tax purposes through the first year choice election. So according to IRS guidelines, which is in the link in your screen and also in the description below, to make the first year choice election, this is what you need to meet. These are the criteria. Be present in the United States for at least 31 days in a row in the current year. So just 1 month, 31 days. And be present in the US for at least 75% of the number of days following the 31-day period, beginning with the first day of the 31-day period and ending with the last day of the current year. Are you confused yet? I know, I'm confused too. So for purposes of this 75% requirement, you can treat up to 5 days of absence from the United States as days of presence in the United States. So all of these are in the information in the Form W7 instructions, which is available online on the IRS website. I know, it was very confusing for me too. So you will need to prepare a statement that your child or your spouse are doing the first year choice election to become treated as residents for tax purposes. So I am including a sample document which you can download from the link in the description below. But suffice this to say, if you are going to stay in the US for 1 month, 31 days, and you're applying for your ITIN, and you are going to stay the next month, another 31 days after applying for your ITIN, then most likely you will be granted that ITIN. So is that clear enough? As long as you stay in the US for a cumulative of 2 months, within which you are applying for your ITIN. Well, hopefully, well, let's boil it down. You need the statement for the first year choice election, and you need to stay in the US for 2 months within those time that you're applying for the ITIN. And if that is not clear, if you are not going to travel outside of the US anytime soon and you're applying for the ITIN, you will most likely be okay. And if you're still confused, like even after all of these things, because I mean, admittedly, this is very confusing, my recommendation is to set up an appointment at the IRS office that's closest to you so the IRS agent can explain this to you in more detail that's in accordance with the law and the guidelines by the IRS. So in order to apply for the IRS, before you even schedule your appointment, you need to fill out your Form W7, which is the application for IRS Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, and you will need to indicate the reason for applying for this. So this is what the form looks like. You will need to fill it out. So the reason for applying for this ITIN is either letter D or E. So dependent of U.S. citizen resident alien or the spouse of U.S. citizen resident alien. In this case, if you choose D or E, you need to enter the name of the main visa holder and their social security number. So in my case, when we applied for my wife and my son's ITIN, we needed to put my name in this section, including my social security number. Then you need to put the name and name at birth if different. Usually these are applicable for the spouse, the wives, or if you have changed your surname. And then mailing address here in the US, you also need to put in your foreign address, your address in your home country. And then your birth information, date of birth, country of birth, and then indicate if you're a male or female. And then other information, your country or countries of citizenship, your foreign tax ID number, your type of visa, the visa number, and the expiration date. 6D, other identification submitted. Usually your passport is the best ID to show here, so enter information from your passport. I think we ignored 6F and 6G, and after that we just have it signed, and then we just went and applied. Then gather the required documents such as your passports, your visa, birth certificates for your spouse and dependents, as well as your own social security number as the primary visa holder. The originals will be needed. The IRS will not accept any photocopies. So, don't even bother with the photocopies. The IRS usually have copier machines. So bring the originals. Please don't send these important documents by mail, because that is an option that's presented in the form. But I strongly suggest going to the IRS office in order to get this done. So you also need to prepare the statement for first year choice election. You also then need to prepare your tax return or the amendment to your tax return, because this is part of that process. When we went through this, we filed for an amendment of our previous year's tax return, and then we attached it to the Form W7. Now, there are several ways of doing this. You can do this by yourself, but you will need to study and read about Form 1040 or Form 1040X, which is the amendment to your income tax return. This process, however, is not covered in this video. I believe you can still use software such as TurboTax, but my suggestion is do not submit it via TurboTax, but rather you can save your tax forms, download them and print them out, and attach that to your Form W7. But if you're not comfortable doing that, I suggest getting the help of a tax preparer or a certified public accountant. Then when everything is ready, you can submit your application by scheduling an appointment with the IRS. You just need to make an appointment and call 1-844-545-5640 or visit this link. Your spouse and your children, or child if you just have one, will need to appear in person. And before going to the appointment, make sure that you have all the required and supporting documents. If your spouse and your dependents are approved for the ITIN, you will receive those via mail. And please safeguard these numbers, as they are essential for tax filings and claiming benefits. The amended tax return or your tax return will also be processed, and if you have refunds, you will receive those via check in the mail, or if you indicated that you want it deposited to your bank account, they will deposit it to your bank account. And filing your taxes can be a complicated affair, and if you need some guidance on how to do that, please watch this video.